I just played Dragon Quest Monsters 3, The Dark Prince, for a little over 60 hours. Was it worth the time spent? I don't know. Let's dig in and find out. Now, I don't want to get into too much of the story elements, but like other Dragon Quest games, I really enjoyed the story and felt the classic Dragon Quest charm felt throughout the series' mainline titles was fully intact. The spoiler-free version of the story is that the game stars Pissarro, who was the main antagonist in Dragon Quest VI. Pissarro is cursed and is unable to harm anything with monster blood, so now he must become a monster wrangler to create an army for battle. The hunt for high-ranked monsters takes Pissarro through the ever-changing seasons of Naderia and its unique environments, with rivers of bubbling lava, mysterious ancient ruins, and soaring towers of cake, for real. Along the way, Pissarro meets the kind-hearted elf Rose, who joins his adventure to seek out ever stronger monsters. The key to Pissarro's success lies with synthesis, the ability to combine two monsters and create a stronger offspring. Each new creation brings Pissarro one step closer to his goal of becoming the master of monster kind. One thing I will say about the story, guys, is that it has some serious adult and religious undertones that I wasn't expecting and greatly appreciate it. The story elements talk quite a bit about sin, atoning for your sins, what happens to your soul if you don't atone for your sins, living with the consequences of your sin, waging war against humanity, and more. Now, this is my first Dragon Quest Monsters game, but certainly not my first Dragon Quest game. So as far as the Monsters series goes, I didn't know what to expect story-wise, but I didn't expect the story to take itself this serious. But as I mentioned, I greatly appreciate it and found that I was actually looking forward to all of the story scenes playing out. Anytime a game can surprise me in a positive way is greatly appreciated. Now, diving into the gameplay, as mentioned, our main character Pissarro plays the role of a monster wrangler. Obviously, Dragon Quest Monsters and Pokemon have some things in common, and I think if you like Pokemon, you'd probably like Dragon Quest Monsters. When battling monsters, you can have your monsters perform a scout command, which, if successful, the monster will then join your team. So selecting the scouting command when battling a monster is equivalent to throwing out a Pokeball. If you weaken the monster, you'll have a greater chance at scouting the monster. So when you press the scout command, a percentage meter will appear and show you what percent you have at recruiting the monster to your party. And occasionally you will defeat a monster and the monster will ask to join your party. It happened maybe a total of 10 times throughout my 60 hours of gameplay. So when it does happen, it's pretty cool, especially if it's a monster you want that's very hard to catch. The seasons also play a big role in the game. For example, in the springtime, I couldn't climb up a mountain, but in the summertime, a vine grew in that same spot, allowing me to climb the mountain. Or in the fall, there was a lake of water I couldn't cross, but in the winter, the water was frozen over, so I was able to now cross the lake of water. Now, in case you were wondering, just like in other JRPGs with humans, monsters can be equipped with items and accessories, as well as assigning talent points. Talent points are used to unlock new abilities from combat to healing, etc. You can use your talent points wherever you see fit. Very similar to spending experience points on a skill tree. Another thing I really liked is the option to auto fight and speed up fights. Sometimes grinding can be pretty mind-numbing, especially when the fights are a little easy. I used auto fight and speed up quite a bit throughout my journey, but I always took it off for boss fights because the boss fights largely required more strategy. I felt that the auto fight and speed up really helped to make the level grinding feel like less of a grind and I personally would love to see Square Enix consider this option in future titles. Another gameplay element I'd like to explain is Rose's Castle. So Rose's Castle acts as like a world hub, sort of like Princess Peach's castle in Super Mario 64. You earn travel crystals throughout the game, and the crystals can transport you to a new area. So it's not exactly a seamless open world RPG. The travel crystals you earn essentially open up a new area that you can only access by going to Rose's Castle and activating the travel crystal portal. Now, one of the biggest gameplay elements of Dragon Quest Monsters is the monster synthesis. Monster synthesis is almost like a game within the main game. The number of unique monsters with differing varieties and abilities that you can create is quite massive and allows for tons of creativity. There's actually many layers to synthesizing that I won't cover in the review, but if you do end up buying the game, there's a channel that did an excellent job covering every element of the game, including video guides on synthesis, and his channel is called Gym Leader Ed. And I'll leave a link to his video in the description box below if you want to check it out. Now, I do not know Gym Leader Ed personally, but I did find that his videos were a very nice companion to the game, allowing you to fully enjoy monster synthesizing and making sure you didn't miss out on anything. Another bit of gameplay I'd like to quickly mention is the dungeons. I was really impressed by the dungeon layouts and puzzles. Now, growing up playing every single Zelda game, I appreciate a good dungeon and puzzle, and I couldn't help but think about how the dungeons and puzzles were very reminiscent of Ocarina of Time. There's even a water dungeon in the game that took quite a bit of puzzle solving to figure out that also made me think about the famous water temple in Ocarina of Time. If they took inspiration from Zelda, I noticed it, and I think they did a fine job making it unique to Dragon Quest. Now, next, let's dive into graphics, guys. Much has been said about them. Now, playing in docked mode, the graphics honestly don't look too bad. That's not to say they look great blown up on a big 85-inch TV, but I heard people compare the game's graphics to Wii graphics, and I think that's a little harsh. One thing for certain that the developers succeeded in graphically is with the colorful and varied environments. Being able to see each environment in 4 different seasons was a treat, and I thought they did a very nice job with the monster character models. I don't think that Square Enix set out to make this game a graphical showcase, so I wouldn't go in expecting that at all. From time to time, the game does hitch a little, but you get used to it, and after a while, I didn't even notice it at all, thankfully. Now, playing in handheld mode on the OLED Switch, I thought it looked much better. These small graphical blemishes that I saw on the big screen, I couldn't see on my OLED screen, and performance-wise, it felt like the game ran exactly the same in handheld mode. Now, guys, I did read that Square announced a planned patch for bug fixes and improvements, so maybe that will help the game run a bit smoother. But overall, I found the graphics and performance to be just fine. The graphics were nothing to write home about, but not so bad that they watered down the experience. And, you know, what can you really expect from a brand new Switch, somewhat open world RPG in this almost 7th year of the Nintendo Switch, right? Now, when it comes to sound, guys, classic Dragon Quest music here. Dragon Quest always has, in my opinion, such an enjoyable soundtrack. Now, I chose the English voice acting, and I feel like the voices align really well with the characters. I was actually surprised that so many monster NPCs had voice acting, and found it to be rather amusing to hear what kind of voice they gave to each monster, and whether or not I felt like the voice fit the bill. So that was interesting. Now, like most Dragon Quest games, I found the music playing in my head even when I wasn't playing the game, and it didn't annoy me. You know how sometimes you'll hear a song and then it gets stuck in your head and you get super annoyed because you really don't like that song? That's what happened, except it's the complete opposite because the soundtrack is really good. So I especially enjoyed the dungeon soundtrack. So if you end up playing this game, let me know what you think in the comments section about the soundtrack. Now when it comes to the audience, guys, I think this game is for anyone that is a fan of the monster hunting, taming genre, JRPGs, and of course fans of the Dragon Quest series. Square Enix did a really nice job with the story by rewarding longtime fans of the Dragon Quest series. Now I won't say anything else about that because I don't want to give anything away, but just know that if you've played some of the other Dragon Quest games, you're going to find a lot to enjoy about this game, especially with the story. Now when it comes to the content, guys, I would say that the game was literally packed with content. Now, maybe I feel this way because, honestly, I was expecting the game to be around a 30-hour adventure, and instead I ended up spending over 60 hours in the game. But I felt like I needed to in order to really see and do everything. As I mentioned before, the monster synthesis is like a game within a game. There's monsters you can create that require synthesizing multiple monsters. So essentially, you can create a monster that requires you to synthesize maybe 10 to 15, maybe 20 times in order to create a higher tier monster. And you can't synthesize a monster until you've grinded it to a level 10, which can take some time depending on what stage of the game you're in. Even after the final credits hit, there's more content. Again, I won't go into detail because I don't want to give any spoilers, but I did spend another 3 to 4 hours after the final credits. Now, when it comes to the difficulty and the grind, if you don't grind, the game is probably going to be a little difficult. If you grind a decent amount, you'll have a decent challenge. And if you grind a ton, you probably won't have a huge challenge. So it's like any JRPG really, in that if you try to rush through it, you're going to get knocked on your ass. And the only solution is to grind, level up your monsters, your monster talents, and build a formidable team of monsters. All power and no defense won't work. All defense and no offense won't work. You've got to build a team that has a mix of power, defense, healing support, and AoE. In case you were wondering, my endgame team, first 4 monsters, was the Lionheart, the Overkilling Machine, which is awesome, the Demon at Arms, and Grandpa Slime. And my bench team was the Archdemon, the King Cure Slime, the Gem Slime, and my very first monster that I synthesized at the beginning of the game, which was the Mudraker. I had a pretty awesome team in my opinion, but even after the credits rolled, I had to go back out and do some grinding before I could experience the true ending. So all in all, I think the difficulty level was just right because you get what you put into the game, and I think that's fair. When it comes to pacing, guys, I think it played out perfectly. The game never overstayed its welcome, yet I felt like it was a very well spent $60. If you think about it, I basically paid $1 for every hour I spent playing the game, which in my opinion is pretty excellent value. Now when it comes to the charm and emotion, guys, if you've played a Dragon Quest game, then you know the developers at Square Enix know how to evoke emotion out of the player, and the game's story and characters have a lot of charm and magic to them, which is one of the main reasons why the Dragon Quest series has been so popular and stood the testament of time. I definitely found myself taken back a few times by the story, and I think if you play through the entire game and you pay attention to the story, you would be too. Now when it comes to replayability, the game does actually have some replay value there, and that's the online monster battling component. Now I did not test this out, as once I finished the game, I honestly felt quite satisfied, But if you're thirsty for more and you want to see how well your monsters fare against other players, you can compete in online battles, which is actually pretty awesome because, like I mentioned before, the amount of unique monsters that you can create combined with the talents, abilities, and stats would make for a lot of fun in online battling. So there's definitely a lot still there. Now, when it comes to the fun factor, guys, I had an absolute blast playing Dragon Quest Monsters. From the moment I picked up the game to the moment I witnessed the true ending, I enjoyed every moment of it. Now, some games start out a little boring, and then they start to get good towards the later half of the game, but Dragon Quest Monsters was pretty much fun throughout the whole game. They didn't wait too long to give you certain abilities that open up the game's possibilities, like some games do sometimes, so you can start having fun as soon as you fire it up, which I really appreciate it. Now, if you're wondering, guys, how long it took me to beat the game, I know I mentioned it a couple times. I will say that sometimes I leave the game paused for a long period of time. I might go eat something, I might have something I gotta do, it might take a phone call. But my total playtime says it's around 67 hours, but like I said, with pause breaks built in, I think it's safe to say I spent 60 hours playing the actual game. Now, if you're wondering if it has any microtransactions, it sort of does. It's there, but you don't have to do it. There's 2 different DLCs available for the game. One called the Molehill DLC, which opens up a specific area in the game where you can find monsters you've scouted or created before and try to catch them again instead of waiting for them to appear in a certain area at a certain time. For example, some monsters only appear in certain areas in the winter or in the summer. But with the Molehill DLC, you don't have to deal with that. I actually bought the Molehill DLC about halfway through the game and would recommend anyone who buys the game and enjoys it up until the point that you learn synthesis to pick up the Molehill DLC, as it greatly enriches the experience and helps you to spend more time creating monsters and less time trying to find monsters. The Molehill DLC costed me $10, and I felt like it was worth the price of admission. Alright guys, so with all that said, I'm now ready to give you my final thoughts. Dragon Quest Monsters 3: The Dark Prince is my first Dragon Quest Monsters game. I did not play the previous 2 Dragon Quest Monster games, and I pre-ordered this game solely based on my experience with Dragon Quest XI-S. I loved that game so much that I did literally everything in the game and obtained the Platinum Trophy. Now, I knew the Monsters games were going to be quite different from Dragon Quest XI, but at the same time, it's actually not that different. The battle system feels similar, the characters and NPCs are familiar, the excellent Dragon Quest soundtrack is fully intact, the story hooked me, it has the same charm I felt when playing the mainline Dragon Quest titles. Dragon Quest Monsters is Dragon Quest, but with the monster catching, taming aspect. So it's pretty simple. Do you like Dragon Quest? Do you like monster catching, taming games? Do you like JRPGs? If you answered yes to any of those 3 questions, I think you will enjoy Dragon Quest Monsters 3. If you answered yes to more than one of those questions, pick it up right now because you won't be disappointed. If you're a Dragon Quest fan, this game is for you. Take it from me, someone who doesn't really play monster taming games, but is a huge JRPG fan and has enjoyed the mainline Dragon Quest titles. This game was an absolute blast to play. I would not go back and trade the 60 plus hours I spent on another game. And I can tell you right now that I will be pre-ordering the next Dragon Quest Monster game. Whenever it comes out, I will be there on day 1. So with no uncertainty, I absolutely recommend Dragon Quest Monsters 3: The Dark Prince. And if you end up picking it up, let me know your thoughts about it in the comments section. As always, thank you for tuning in for my review. If you enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe, and I hope you have a wonderful day. What's up, guys? If you enjoyed this video, please smash the like button as it helps me out a ton. And if you haven't already, please consider subscribing to the channel. Over here to the left, you can find all my social media info, or just remember to search for ThunderSteve85. As always, thank you guys for tuning in, and remember, you're never too old to play video games.